Here's today's First Word Daily Devotion.
On June the 24th, we turn our attention to 2 Kings 11 through 13, where we're introduced to Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah. So in other words, she is the queen mother. And notice as we read this, we are going to see a theological struggle centered on what is proper worship. And so just keep that in mind as you're reading this. But look again as you read at verse 10. There's a reference here to King David. And notice King David keeps coming up in the narrative. And he's going to continue to come up into the narrative even until the point where we see Jesus Christ, of course, who is the son of David. So keep that in mind. Look at what happens in verse 17. Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people that they should be the Lord's people. So also between the kings and the people, and then all the people of the land went to the house of Baal, tore it down, and its altars and images. They broke it in pieces. They killed Matan, the priest of Baal, before the altars, and the priests posted watchmen over the house of the Lord. Now, skip down to verse 20. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet. After Athaliah, I'm sorry, I'm not saying that name right, but had been put to death. That's the queen mother who had been put to death with the sword at the king's house. Now, look here. Pay close attention here. We're so grateful for the ESV and the scholarship that's represented in the ESV. Every time you have a footnote, that's a representation of many, many decades of scholastic work, scholarship, work of scholars. And so we see Jehoash, look at that, there's a footnote, footnote 2. Jehoash is the alternate spelling of Joash, son of Ahaziah, as in verse 2. So look in verse 2. Let's see, there's a footnote here, and chapter 12 and verse 1, Jehoash. Now there's a footnote 3. Jehoash is an alternate spelling of Joash, son of Ahaziah, as in 11:2, also verse 2, 4, 6, 7, and 18. And so in other words, you have all of these references that people get bent out of shape over, thinking, see, this is 2 or 3 different people. No, it's not. It's just an alternate spelling, just like me. Am I Timothy? Am I Andrew? Or am I Andy? And the answer to that is yes. My name is all 3, Timothy, Andrew, Brown, and I go by Andy. But I want you to see, here we have in verse 4 in chapter 12, this famous instance of the chest of Joash. So pay attention there. I remember growing up in church, we were doing a building campaign, and we had the chest of Joash. Maybe some of your contacts, do you remember that churches have done likewise and had a little chest or a box where people could put money in to honor the Lord. Anyway, I'm not saying if that's good or bad. I'm just simply saying what people did and I've experienced. And where does that come from? It comes from a passage just like this in 2 Kings chapter 12. But let's turn over here. Look at verse 5 on the next page. Verse 5, therefore the Lord gave Israel a Savior, so they escaped from the hand of the Syrians. Now that's strange language whenever you see that word Savior. The Lord gave Israel a Savior. They escaped. Verse 8, nevertheless, they did not depart from the sins of the house of Jeroboam. That's another name that keeps popping up, which he made Israel to sin, but walked in them. And the Asheroth also remained in Samaria. And so here they have a Savior that God's gave them, but he's a Savior, but he's not this kind of Savior that they need. They need someone who's going to give them a new heart. Now, speaking of needing saving, we see also Elisha, this mighty prophet of God. He is also in need of saving. Look at what happens to Elisha. He is susceptible to death. Here's this man who's raised the dead, but here he comes for his time to fall under the curse of Adam and die. Look at verse 14. Now when Elisha had fallen sick with the illness of which he was to die. By the way, that's going to happen to all of us. Let's just remember that. That's going to happen to all of us. We're going to have a sickness in which we're going to die. But that doesn't have to be the end. As a matter of fact, it isn't the end. Our end is hope in the Lord and in resurrection. And speaking of resurrection, look, even though Elisha dies, there's still resurrection. His death is put in the tone of resurrection. Look at verse 20. Elisha died and they buried him. Bands of Moabites used to invade the land in the spring of the year. As a man was being buried, behold, a marauding band was seen, and the man was thrown into the grave of Elisha. And as soon as the man touched the bones of Elisha, he revived, and he stood on his feet. So even the death of this mighty prophet is put on the tone, or in the tone, of resurrection. Now here's a reference again in chapter 25 of our Acts reading of the third day. We see that reference here, the third day. 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. Don't forget what's going on here with Paul. And look at verse 8. Paul argued in his defense, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and there be tried on these? And then, of course, Paul says, no, don't send me back to Jerusalem. That's the reason that I'm here in the first place. And then look at what he says in verse 11. I appeal to Caesar. Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, to Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you shall go. And so the narrative will continue with Paul as we read tomorrow to see what happens with Paul as he makes his way then, or he gets ready rather, to go to Rome. But look at Psalm 143, especially in light of the life of Paul. Look at verse 3. For the enemy has pursued my soul, he's crushed my life to the ground, he has made me sit in darkness like those long dead. Therefore my spirit faints within me, my heart within me is appalled. And then look at verse 5. I remember the days of old. I meditate on all that you've done. I ponder the work of your hands. I stretch out my hands to you. My soul thirsts for you like a parched land. Why are we reading the Bible? Because we want our memory to be the memory of what God has done with his people. Why do we have these certain events that we celebrate like Christmas and Easter and all of these different patterns of the year? Because we want to have a working and living memory of the acts or mighty deeds of God. Answer me quickly, O Lord, my spirit fails. Hide not your face from me, lest I be like those who go down to the pit. Let me hear in the morning of your steadfast love. Now look at this language. For in you I trust. Is that where you are? Make me know the way I should go, for to you I lift up my soul. As you're reading the Bible, lift up your soul to God. And listen, he is there ready to answer any request that you give him.